So we already talked about sort of the basics of fungi when we were going over taxonomy. We talked about sort of general characteristics. We'll review that today, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about some of the characteristics, some of the types of fungi, things like that. So to begin, let's think about, hold on. So let's think about where we are in terms of taxonomy. So what domain, when we're speaking about fungi, what domain are we in? There's only 3 domains. You are in the eukaryotic domain. What kingdom are we referring to? Fungi is the kingdom. And then within that, there are various classes, orders, families of fungi. And so we won't get into all of those details, but that's where we are. So, domain, eukarya, kingdom, fungi. And if we think back to the characteristics of fungi, how many cells, what's the word we use for the number of cells you would find in the fungus kingdom? Abby?
Unicellular and multicellular.
Correct. So they are both unicellular and multicellular. There are some fungi that are multiple cells and others that are single cells. How about presence or absence of a nucleus? What word will we use here for fungi? They are eukaryotes. They do have a nucleus. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus.
You do.
They obtain their nutrients, you guys told me, by breaking down organic matter. So what would we call them?
Heterotrophs.
Heterotrophs. Decomposers is fine too. They are decomposers. They have what we call extracellular digestion, which means the hyphae, these things that look like roots, they secrete enzymes out of them, and then that breaks down the organic material, and then the fungi absorb those broken down nutrients. Okay? So it's sort of, that's how they digest their food. Now, like plant cells and bacteria and archaea, fungi do have a cell wall, but remember, those cell walls can be made of different materials. What was a cell wall made of in plants? Cellulose. In fungi, it's a cell wall that's made of chitin. Also the same material that makes up insect exoskeletons. Fungi reproduce in a couple ways. They can reproduce via spores or by budding. Spores are just single reproductive cells. Typically they're very, very small, and they sort of float through the air. When a spore lands in an environment that's hospitable to it, it will start to grow into a new fungus. Budding is when a new organism starts to sort of grow out of the side of the original organism. Yeast reproduce through budding. Like a new yeast just starts growing out of the side of another yeast. It breaks off and becomes its own thing. It's a form of asexual reproduction. Examples of fungi include mushrooms, probably the one you're most familiar with, mold, yeast, mildew,
What's an ant?
athlete's foot is a fungus, ringworm, skin infection, also a fungus. So there's lots of varieties of types of fungus.
What do you get? Foot fungus?
Yeah, foot fungus. Oh, toenail fungus. You ever see those gross commercials on
Burger
TV?
King foot lettuce.
Here, some of this from Mr. Arcuri's bathroom.
Yay! What?
These are yeast. So what you see here, these orange things are yeast. You can see they're in the process of budding, whereas a new yeast organism is growing and is reproducing. So if we think about the anatomy of fungi, So this is a mushroom. So different types of fungi have different parts. We'll talk about mushrooms here. When you look at a mushroom, the part you see, the top is called the cap of the mushroom. The underside, where you have those sort of thin membranes of material, those are called the gills of the fungus. These tiny little dots represent spores. One of the ways you can identify types of mushrooms by making a spore print. If you find a mushroom growing in your backyard, one of the techniques you use to identify is you take the cap off, put it on a white sheet of paper, let it sit overnight, and then when you take it off the next day, it will leave a spore print because the spores will settle out overnight, and the color of the spore print often is an indicator used to identify different types of mushrooms.
No, we should touch.
Stalk is the vertical part of the mushroom. And then growing, the part that anchors it in the ground or attaches it to a tree or whatever, those are called the hyphae. They look like roots, but they're not really roots.
Wow.
I have a field guide of mushrooms somewhere, but the gills are where the spores are produced. Spores are the reproductive cells. Stalk supports the cap, and then the hyphae are where the food is actually absorbed. So when we think about fungi nutrition, fungi basically, from their hyphae, release enzymes. For example, the mold on this orange, what you see are the hyphae sort of growing and spreading over that orange. They're releasing enzymes, which cause the material to digest and break down, and then into those hyphae they can absorb those simplified components. Okay? And here's you see lots of examples. And so if you think about mushrooms and where you would find them, usually they're in an area where you have some dead, decaying matter. You know, an artist fungus growing out of the bark of a tree, it's breaking down the material in the bark of a tree. In my front lawn, we have a ring of mushrooms that pops up every single spring. We used to have a tree there, and we got rid of it and ground the stump down, but in the soil are still the roots, and they're slowly being broken down year after year by those fungi. So they are decomposers. They break down organic material, waste. Most are decomposers, but some are parasitic and feed on other organisms. Examples, athlete's foot. Why is it called athlete's foot? I don't know.
It's gross. Because it makes you sweat a
No,
lot.
no.
It's gross.
It's often spread in areas like locker rooms where you have, wet, moist conditions, warm, so the fungus can spread from one person to another in those conditions. Here's an extreme case, athlete's foot. These are really interesting cordyceps fungus, which I'll show you the video sometime. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but this fungus grows inside of ants and sort of takes over their body, makes the ant crawl up to a top area of a plant, and then the fungus breaks through, grows out of them. This is the fungus, and releases its spores to spread to other ants. Yeah, they're sometimes make ant zombies. Yeah. So fungi do have beneficial uses for humans. Some fungi can produce antibiotics. In fact, the first antibiotic, you know what it was?
Juice.
No, the first name of like a
Cough and cold.
Nope.
Sneeze.
Penicillin.
I'm just gonna. I'm allergic to that.
Penicillin. And it's named penicillin because it came from Penicillium notatum, which is a naturally occurring fungus. And what scientists found is when some of this fungus was growing in their petri dishes, where they had bacteria cultures, there would be a ring around the fungus where no bacteria would grow. And by analyzing the substance that this fungus was producing that kept the bacteria from growing here, they were able to isolate it and find a compound that they can then use to give to people, and that's what penicillin is. And that's where the first antibiotics were discovered. We use fungi all the time to produce a variety of foods. Blue cheese.
I had a fish name.
Gorgonzola, Roquefort cheese. All of these, the actual blue part are the spores from this mold that's growing inside of the cheese. It breaks down and the cheese, but also adds that distinct flavor that you get in blue cheese.
How do you not use it so good?
What?
How do you not die from it?
Because it's not harmful to humans. It's breaking down the cheese, gives it a flavor that we like. Other things that are fermented are often made using fungi. Yeast is the fungus. Yeast used for making bread, wine, beer. Those yeast, what they do is they are digesting sugars in the bread dough, for example, using that as their energy. And the byproducts that they produce are carbon dioxide, which causes what to happen to the dough? Yeah, that's why the dough rises, because carbon dioxide bubbles that the yeast is releasing are causing it to expand. The little holes, when you cut a slice of bread, the little like
Fluffy.
openings in there, each one was filled with a tiny bit of carbon dioxide gas that yeast had produced. Some yeast convert sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. That's used to make beer and wine. Others, and sometimes it's bacteria that are used for other fermented products.
In your house?
This is not my house, but this is what forms. Not quite this big or this perfect, but yeah, these are sometimes called fairy rings. And what they are is they're basically a group of mushrooms growing, and they sort of spread out as their hyphae sort of break down materials that are in the soil.
Infographic show.
Let's go back several slides. I'll show you. There's some cool videos. All right, first, this one's cool because it shows you time lapse of fungi growing. Yeah, we're done with our notes.